911, what is your emergency? My son is not breathing. Is he breathing at all? No, he's not. Did something happen? We were just playing and he fell. He hit his head.
About how an 8-year-old Palmdale boy was killed from someone who says he saw it happen.
They say that a mother's love is the safest harbor in the world. We're taught from the moment we are born that the one person who will always protect us, who will always stand between us and the darkness, is the woman who gave us life. But for 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez, that rule did not apply. For Gabriel, the darkness didn't come from a stranger in an alleyway. It didn't come from a monster under the bed. The darkness lived in the kitchen. It sat on the couch. It held the keys to the house. The city of Palmdale, California, sits just north of Los Angeles. It is a place of dusty winds, working-class families, and quiet streets. It is the kind of place where neighbors wave to each other, where children ride bicycles on the sidewalks, and where secrets are kept behind closed blinds. On May 22, 2013, the secrets of Apartment 4 in the complex on East Avenue Q10 finally spilled out onto the pavement. And when they did, they revealed a level of cruelty that would shake the entire nation to its core. This is not just a story about a crime. This is a story about a failure so massive, so systemic, and so heartbreaking that it forces us to ask a terrifying question. If a child screams for help and everyone hears him but nobody moves, are we all guilty? This is the story of the 8 months of hell endured by Gabriel Fernandez. And be warned, the things you are about to hear are the stuff of nightmares. To understand how Gabriel's life ended, we first have to understand how it began. And surprisingly, it didn't begin in horror. For the vast majority of his short life, Gabriel was happy. He was born in 2005 to Pearl Fernandez, but Pearl was not interested in being a mother. She had a history of instability, a history of drug use, and a history of drifting through life without purpose. Almost immediately after he was born, Pearl gave Gabriel away. She handed him over to her uncle and his partner, Michael and David. For the first few years of his life, Gabriel was loved. He was doted on. He was the center of their world. Photos from this time show a boy with a bright, infectious smile. He was known for being energetic, compassionate, and deeply affectionate. Later, due to family dynamics, he moved in with his grandparents, Robert and Sandra Fernandez. By all accounts, this was a safe home. His grandfather, Robert, adored him. They would play in the yard, watch cartoons, and live a relatively normal existence. Gabriel was a normal kid. He liked superheroes. He liked drawing. He loved his family. He thought he was safe. But in 2012, everything changed. Pearl Fernandez reappeared. She didn't come back because she missed her son. She didn't come back because she had suddenly developed a maternal instinct. According to later testimonies and the prosecution's theory, Pearl came back for a much colder, more calculated reason: welfare benefits. She realized that having Gabriel in her custody meant more money from the state. And she wasn't alone. She had a boyfriend, a man named Isaro Aguirre. Aguirre was a security guard. He was a large man, physically imposing, standing over 6 feet tall. To the outside world, he seemed quiet. He had worked at a retirement home where the elderly residents reportedly liked him. They called him gentle. But inside the walls of that apartment in Palmdale, Isaro Aguirre was anything but gentle. He was a man filled with a bizarre, explosive rage, a rage that he would soon focus entirely on one small, defenseless target: Gabriel. In October 2012, over the protests of his grandparents, who feared for his safety, Pearl took Gabriel back. She moved him into her apartment, and the clock started ticking. It didn't take long for the signs to appear. Gabriel started attending a new school. His teacher was a woman named Jennifer Garcia. Jennifer was observant. She cared about her students, and almost immediately she noticed that something was wrong with the new boy, Gabriel. He was quiet, withdrawn, but it was the physical questions that started to pile up. One day, Gabriel came to school, and Jennifer noticed something odd. Jennifer noticed bruises. not just the kind of bruises a kid gets from playing soccer or falling off a bike. These were different. One day, she saw that his lip was busted. Another day, she noticed patches of hair missing from his scalp. When she asked him about it, Gabriel gave the rehearsed answers that abused children are often forced to memorize. "I fell," he said. "I hit a door," he said. But then the lies started to crack. One morning in late October, Gabriel asked his teacher a question that stopped her cold. He asked, "Is it normal for moms to hit their kids with the metal part of the belt?" Jennifer Garcia was horrified. She looked at the bruises again, and now she saw the pattern, the buckle. She immediately did what she was legally required to do. She did what any decent human being would do. She called the hotline. She called the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. This should have been the end of the horror. This should have been the moment the cavalry arrived. A teacher reported abuse. The child admitted to being hit with a weapon. In a functioning system, this is where the police show up. The child is removed and the parents are investigated. But that is not what happened. A social worker was assigned to the case. Her name was Stephanie Rodriguez. She visited the home. She spoke to Pearl. She spoke to Gabriel. But Pearl Fernandez was a manipulator. She knew how to play the game. She told the social worker that Gabriel was a liar. She said he was difficult. She said he made up stories to get attention. And Isaro Aguirre, he played the role of the stern but loving father figure. Incredibly, despite the bruises, despite the teacher's report, the social worker bought the story. She noted that Gabriel seemed safe. She didn't strip search him to check for other injuries. She didn't interview him alone in a way that made him feel safe enough to tell the truth. She left the apartment, and the door closed again. As the weeks turned into months, the abuse didn't just continue, it escalated. It evolved into something sadistic. Jennifer Garcia continued to call. She called again and again. She started keeping a log. Every time Gabriel came to school with a new injury, she wrote it down. One day, Gabriel came to class with his knuckles swollen and scabbed. When Jennifer asked what happened, he whispered that his mother had shot him. She had shot him with a BB gun. Not by accident, she had used him for target practice. Jennifer, panicked, called the social worker again. "He has gunshot wounds," she said, but the system moved at a glacial pace. The social worker updated the file. She made phone calls, but nobody came to take Gabriel away. By January, Gabriel began to change. The bright, smiling boy from the photos was gone. In his place was a shell. He started wearing long sleeves, even on hot days, to hide the marks on his arms. He stopped playing at recess. He would stand by the fence, alone, looking at the ground. Other students noticed that he smelled. He smelled of cat litter and urine. Why? Because at home he wasn't allowed to use the bathroom. Pearl and Isaro had decided that Gabriel was dirty, and
was
they
a
began to
small
lock
wooden
him in a
cupboard
small
intended
cabinet
for
in the
stereo
bedroom.
equipment
They
or
called
linens.
it the box.
It was tiny. Gabriel was forced to crawl inside. Once he was in, they would close the doors. But that wasn't enough. They handcuffed his ankles. They handcuffed his wrists. They shoved a sock in his mouth so he couldn't scream. And then they would push a heavy dresser in front of the doors so he couldn't get out. He would spend hours in there, sometimes entire days. He ate in there. He slept in there. And because they wouldn't let him out, he was forced to relieve himself in there. Back at school, the situation reached a breaking point. Gabriel began to act out in strange ways. The hunger was consuming him. Pearl was starving him. While the rest of the family ate dinner, pizza, chicken, normal food, Gabriel was given cat litter to eat. He was given rotten spinach. Sometimes he was given nothing at all. Students began to notice that their snacks were going missing. Gabriel was caught digging through the trash cans in the cafeteria, looking for half-eaten sandwiches or discarded apple cores. He was starving to death in plain sight. Jennifer Garcia saw this. She saw the desperation in his eyes. She tried to give him food, but he was terrified. He told her that his mom checked him when he got home. If Pearl found out he had eaten at school, she would make him throw it up. She would force her fingers down his throat to vomit up the food just to punish him. The social workers were still involved, theoretically, but they were failing at every turn. They started to view Gabriel not as a victim, but as a problem child. Pearl had successfully convinced them that Gabriel was mentally unstable. To prove this, she forced Gabriel to write a suicide note. It was a scrap of paper written in a child's scrawl. It said he wanted to die. It said he was bad. The social workers looked at this note and, instead of seeing it as a desperate cry for help or a coerced forgery, they saw it as confirmation that Gabriel needed therapy, not rescue. They didn't see the mother standing over him, dictating every word. Throughout the spring of 2013, the torture became routine. Isauro Aguirre, the security guard, began to use pepper spray on Gabriel. If Gabriel fell asleep while doing chores, they sprayed him in the face. If he cried, they sprayed him. They beat him with bats. They beat him with the metal end of a vacuum cleaner cord. They called him homophobic slurs. Aguirre, seemingly obsessed with the idea that the 8-year-old boy was gay, used this as justification for the brutality. He wanted to toughen him up. As we move into April, the visits from the authorities became less frequent. The file on Gabriel Fernandez was thick with reports, accusations, and red flags. But it was just paper. Nobody was looking at the boy. Nobody was stripping him down to see the BB gun pellets embedded in his skin. Nobody was looking at his teeth, which were being knocked out one by one. Then came May, the final month. In the weeks leading up to May 22nd, Gabriel stopped coming to school. Jennifer Garcia sat at her desk, looking at the empty chair. She called the absences in, but by then, Pearl had decided to keep him home, not to protect him, but to hide him. The injuries were getting too severe to explain away. His face was swollen. His body was covered in burns from cigarettes. Gabriel Fernandez was disappearing. He was vanishing from the world, inch by inch, day by day. He was locked in that cabinet, bound and gagged, listening to the muffled sounds of his mother and her boyfriend watching TV, laughing, living their lives just a few feet away. He was alone, he was in pain, and he was waiting for the end. On the night of May 22nd, 2013, Gabriel didn't clean up his toys fast enough. That was his crime. That was the trigger. Isauro Aguirre stood up. Pearl Fernandez stood up. And the final beatdown began. The night of May 22nd, 2013 did not end with a whimper. It ended with a catastrophic explosion of violence. According to the testimony given later by Gabriel's siblings, who watched in paralyzed fear from the corner of the room, Gabriel had failed to clean up his toys. Isauro Aguirre, the 6'2" security guard, snapped. He began to punch the 8-year-old. He knocked him to the ground. But this wasn't discipline. This was an execution. As Gabriel lay on the floor, curled into a fetal position trying to protect his vital organs, Aguirre kicked him repeatedly in the ribs. He picked him up and slammed him into the wall. The drywall cracked from the impact. Pearl Fernandez did not stop him. She joined in. She yelled. She struck him. And then, silence. Gabriel went limp. His eyes rolled back. His breath stopped. Panic set in, but not panic for Gabriel's life, panic for their own freedom. Pearl and Isauro Aguirre knew they had gone too far. For several minutes, they didn't call 911. Instead, they tried to wake him up. They threw water on his face. When that didn't work, they moved him to the bedroom. They started cleaning up the blood. They hid the bat. They hid the BB gun. They were sanitizing the crime scene while their son lay dying on the floor. Finally, at 11:49 p.m., Pearl made the call. If you listen to the 911 call, what strikes you is the tone. Pearl isn't screaming. She isn't sobbing uncontrollably like a mother who just found her child unresponsive. She sounds annoyed. She sounds like someone trying to order a pizza, but the line is bad. She tells the dispatcher he's not breathing, but her voice is flat. Behind her, you can hear the chaotic noise of a house trying to hide its secrets. When paramedics from the Los Angeles County Fire Department arrived, they were met with a scene that seasoned veterans later described as the worst they had ever seen. They found Gabriel naked, lying on the floor of the bedroom. Pearl stuck to her story. He was playing with his brother and he fell and hit his head. The paramedics looked at the boy and they knew instantly that was a lie. You don't get black eyes, cigarette burns, smashed ribs, and BB gun wounds from falling down. James Cermak, one of the paramedics, later testified that Gabriel's body looked like a roadmap of torture. He noted that Gabriel's skull felt mushy, a sign of massive internal bleeding and trauma. His feet were bruised and cut. His groin was mutilated. They initiated CPR. They tried to pump air into his lungs, but his chest was so battered, it barely moved. They rushed him to the ambulance. At the hospital, the emergency room doctors were horrified. Dr. James Rebe, a senior deputy medical examiner who would later become key to the case, noted that Gabriel's heart had stopped. They managed to get a pulse back, but it was faint. The damage to his brain was catastrophic. He was brain dead. Nurses wept in the hallway. Doctors, who are trained to be stoic, struggled to keep their composure. They photographed the injuries. The photos would later become the silent witnesses that Pearl and DeSauro couldn't silence. While Gabriel was fighting his final losing battle on life support, detectives began to interview the parents. Pearl Fernandez sat in the interrogation room. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking, "Is my son okay?" Instead, she was worried about herself. Detectives noted that she seemed more concerned about the fact that she hadn't finished her dinner. She sat there, fixing her hair, adjusting her clothes, maintaining the lie. "He hits himself," she told them. "He lies, he steals, he wanted to kill himself." She tried to paint an 8-year-old boy as a villain, as a master manipulator who inflicted these injuries on himself to get them in trouble. Isauro Aguirre, in a separate room, played the gentle giant. He spoke softly. He admitted to tapping Gabriel on the bottom for discipline, but denied hurting him. He said he was just trying to help the boy become a man. But the detectives saw his hands. His knuckles were swollen. He claimed he had injured them fixing a car. In reality, they were swollen from the force of punching a 60-pound child. On May 24, 2013, 2 days after he was beaten, Gabriel Fernandez was taken off life support. He died at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. He was 8 years old. With his death, the charges changed. This was no longer child abuse. This was capital murder. The investigation that followed peeled back the layers of the House of Horrors. Investigators searched the apartment, and what they found confirmed the worst nightmares of the prosecution. They found the box, the small cabinet where Gabriel spent his nights. Inside, they found traces of his DNA. They found the handcuffs. They found the BB gun hidden in a closet. They found a bat with Gabriel's blood on it. But the most damning evidence didn't come from the furniture. It came from the autopsy. Dr. James Rebe performed the autopsy. In his decades of experience, he said he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't just a beating. This was torture. The medical examiner documented the injuries. The list is long, and it is difficult to hear.
His stomach contained cat litter. It contained no normal food. But physical evidence only tells you what happened. It doesn't tell you how. For that, the police turned to the only other people in that apartment, Gabriel's siblings, Ezekiel and Virginia. They were children themselves, terrified that if they spoke, they would be next. But slowly, gently, detectives got them to open up. Ezekiel, Gabriel's older brother, became the voice of the dead. He told investigators about the games Isauro would play. He described how Isauro would put on heavy clothes, wake Gabriel up in the middle of the night, and beat him. He described how Pearl would laugh while it happened. He described how they forced Gabriel to eat his own vomit. He described how, on that final night, he watched his little brother go limp and knew in his heart that Gabriel wasn't coming back. As the detectives built their case against Pearl and Izaudo, a secondary rage began to boil over in Los Angeles. The public learned about the social workers. The timeline revealed that DCFS had visited the home multiple times while this torture was happening. They saw the black eyes. They saw the suicide note. They took the photos, and yet they closed the file. 4 social workers, Stephanie Rodriguez, Patricia Clement, Kevin Baum, and Gregory Merritt, were fired. But in an unprecedented move, the district attorney decided that firing them wasn't enough. He charged them criminally. He charged them with child abuse and falsifying public records. The argument was simple. By seeing the abuse and choosing to do nothing, they were accomplices to the murder. The stage was set for a trial that would expose the darkest corners of human nature. Pearl Fernandez and Izaudo Aguirre were facing the death penalty, but they weren't going to go down without a fight. Izaudo's defense team prepared a strategy that seemed impossible. They were going to argue that this monster, this man who beat a child to death over dirty toys, was actually a nice guy who just lost his temper. And Pearl? Pearl was going to rely on a low IQ defense. She was going to claim she didn't understand what she was doing. But the prosecutor, John Hatami, had a weapon they couldn't counter. He had the truth, and he had the fury of a city that demanded blood for blood. The trial was about to begin, and the details that would come out in that courtroom would make even the jury cry. Justice is often slow, but in the case of Gabriel Fernandez, when it finally arrived, it arrived with the force of a hurricane. The man tasked with speaking for Gabriel was Deputy District Attorney John Hatami. For Hatami, this wasn't just a job, it was personal. He had survived child abuse himself. He saw himself in Gabriel. And when he stood up in that courtroom to face Izaudo Aguirre, you could feel the weight of every single bruise, every single burn, and every single tear Gabriel had shed. Izaudo Aguirre went to trial first. His defense team tried to argue that he was simply a strict disciplinarian who had exploded in a moment of rage. They tried to humanize him. They showed photos of him feeding elderly people at his old job. They tried to say, look, he's not a monster. But John Hatami wasn't having it. He didn't just tell the jury what happened, he showed them. In a moment that sucked the air out of the room, prosecutors brought the box into the courtroom. There it sat, the small wooden cabinet. Jurors gasped. They stood up and looked inside. They saw the handcuffs. They saw the club used to beat him. It became impossible to believe the defense's story. You don't build a torture chamber by accident. You don't handcuff an 8-year-old boy inside a box because you lost your temper. You do it because you enjoy it. The most devastating testimony came from Gabriel's older brother, Ezekiel. Now a teenager, he had to sit on the stand, just feet away from the man who had tormented him. Through tears, Ezekiel described the games. He described how Izaudo would make Gabriel do exercises until he collapsed, and then beat him for collapsing. He described how they would laugh. The jury didn't need long. On November 15, 2017, they returned their verdict. Izaudo Aguirre was found guilty of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of torture. But the question remained, what punishment did he deserve? The jury deliberated again, and on December 11th they came back with their answer: death. Izaudo Aguirre was sentenced to die by lethal injection. Then it was Pearl's turn. Pearl Fernandez, the mother who had birthed him and then broke him, realized that her game was over. She saw what happened to Izaudo. She knew that if she went to trial, the jury would sentence her to death too. So in a final act of self-preservation, she took a plea deal. She pled guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. She agreed to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But she couldn't escape the sentencing hearing, and that hearing became the voice of the community. On June 7, 2018, Judge George Lamelli delivered one of the most blistering sentences in California history. He looked at Pearl and Izaudo, who sat there with their heads down, and he didn't hold back. Judge Lamelli said, I can only wish that in the middle of the night you wake up and you think of the things you did to that poor young man. I hope you think about the pain you caused this child and that it tortures you." He paused, his voice trembling with a rare display of judicial emotion. "I hope it tortures you the way you tortured him." Even in that moment, Pearl seemed detached. When given a chance to speak, she mumbled a generic apology. "I'm sorry to my family for what I did." It was hollow. It was empty. It was the words of a woman who was sorry she got caught, not sorry for what she destroyed. Jennifer Garcia, the teacher who had tried so hard to save him, stood up and spoke directly to the killers. She told them how Gabriel just wanted to be loved. She told them how he made a Mother's Day card for Pearl, even after she had beaten him. "He loved you," she said through tears. "He loved you. He just wanted you to love him back." Pearl Fernandez was sent to Chowchilla State Women's Prison. She will die there. She will never see a sunset as a free woman again. Isauro Aguirre sits on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He spends 23 hours a day in a cell, waiting for an execution date that may never come, but living in a cage, just like the one he built for Gabriel. And the social workers? The case against them was eventually dismissed by an appellate court. They argued that while they were bad at their jobs, they were not criminally liable for the murder. They walked free, but their names and their failures are forever etched in the public record. Because of this case, laws in California changed. The way social workers are trained changed. The system was forced to look in the mirror. But laws and policies cannot bring back the boy with the bright smile. Gabriel Fernandez would have been an adult today. He might have been an artist. He might have been a teacher. He might have been a father. We will never know who he would have become. But we know who he was. He was a boy who loved superheroes. He was a boy who loved his brother and sister. He was a boy who, even in the midst of hell, still found the capacity to love the mother who was killing him. We tell his story not just to document a crime, but to remember him. We tell it so that the next time a teacher sees a bruise or a neighbor hears a scream, they won't look away. We tell it because Gabriel Fernandez couldn't scream for himself, so now we must scream for him. If you suspect a child is being abused, do not wait. Do not assume someone else has called. Be the voice that saves a life. Rest in peace, Gabriel. You are no longer in the box. You are free. Thank you for watching this difficult story. If you believe Gabriel's story needs to be heard, please like this video and share it. It helps us keep his memory alive. I'll see you in the next investigation. Stay safe.